We acknowledge that Tri-Cities Community Television operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them along with the waters and all that is above and below.
On May 4th, 2026, the Coquitlam City Council gathered to debate and decide on a number of the city's most significant issues. From the adoption of the 2026 annual tax rates bylaw, impacting city services, property taxation, and regional funding, to major changes in high-density housing policies aimed at aligning with new provincial housing legislation. Council also reviewed a long-term vision for protecting and expanding Coquitlam's urban forest through a comprehensive new management strategy and implementation plan. For Tri-Cities Community TV's Local Journalism Initiative, I'm Yuna Fahim.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mayor Richard Stewart, and I'll be chairing tonight's council meeting. It's a special council meeting, which only means that at the beginning of the year, when we passed our council schedule, this was going to be a committee meeting, which we're not allowed to make decisions at committee. We make decisions at council, but as May and June started to unfold, there were way too many decision agendas coming, so we added a council meeting day instead. We converted today into a council meeting day. So that's the reason it's called a special council meeting. I do want to acknowledge at the beginning that Coquitlam considers ourselves to be blessed by the reality that our name is we share a name with the First Nations of this community that have rooted over these lands and protected them and welcomed so many of us to their traditional territory. But the First Nation is named after the Hunkamanam word redfish of the river, Coquitlam, and it refers to the spawning salmon. And so we thank the First Nation peoples that have become our friends, and we wish them well. And today is also International Firefighters Day, and it comes out of a tragedy in 1998, December 4th, 1998, in Australia, when 5 civic firefighters had joined in the battle of wildfires, and when the wind shifted, the platoon of 5 lost their lives to the flames. Coincidentally, tonight we also have the second last item is the Fire Prevention and Life Safety Amendment bylaw that comes out of changes at the provincial level of some of the fire legislation, the statutory fire rules coming out of the province. And so we thank the firefighters that are here and all of Coquitlam's team of firefighters for their work in our community and for their charitable work and for Deputy Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the
Sorry, I just recognized someone in the audience. Former cabinet minister in my way for Malargo. The person that took over from you wasn't nearly as good. I took over after him. John Kishore, good to see you. And particularly good because we had him in our council chambers a month or two ago when we bestowed upon John and upon Mayor O'Neill the freedom of the city for a lifetime of tremendous work. Well, not a lifetime for Coquitlam, but a lifetime for his community and the time that he served our community here in Coquitlam. Thank you. Now, Deputy Corporate Officer, before I recognize you.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, April 27th, 2026. Recommendation is that they be approved.
Moved by Councillor Atkinson, second by Councillor Hodge. All those in favor? Opposed? Approved unanimously.
The next item is minutes of the public hearing held on Monday, April 27th, 2026. Recommendation is that they be approved.
Moved by Councillor Towner, second by Councillor Hodge. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
The next item on the agenda is a report of the General Manager, Finance and Legal regarding annual tax rates bylaw number 5520-2026. Recommendation is the council give first, second, and third readings to annual tax rates bylaw number 5520-2026.
Second. Moved by Councillor John Lick, second by Councillor Kim. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I just have a quick question to staff. I think I've asked this before, but on the requisition that is sent out to property taxpayers, do we make it very clear what portion is collected on behalf of the City of Coquitlam Services and what is collected on behalf of other agencies? Do we show that separately?
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Councillor Tanner, yes, we absolutely do show other government agencies separate from the city's municipal tax levy.
Thank you.
I think we should make it bigger. Councillor Towner, did I interrupt you? No. Okay.
Sorry. Talking about how the provincial government changed the tax deferment program, I'm just curious if anyone of you know, because I had someone ask me, is the interest that's now charged on the balance that is carried, is it owed each year, the interest, or is it added to the balance owing when this property is sold?
Ms. Cabal.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Councillor Towner, it is owed at the end of the term. It is not due and payable each year.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I have no more questions.
Go, Councillor Hodge.
Just a follow-up to that, of course, it is now compounding and at a much higher rate. So certainly the provincial government has made it harder for those residents, 2,546 of them, according to the report, who do defer their taxes, and I suspect there will probably be more as our population ages, but that's a program that is not nearly as good as it was. I note in the report that we have sent a letter to the province requesting both an expansion of that, and also I think we also mentioned about the utility bills, which is separate from here, but a lot of people are not able to defer those as well. So pleased that we are at least advocating to the province on behalf of our residents. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I'll add one. Paragraphs 1 and 2, or the bullets 1 and 2 on page 4, talk about changes to the school tax, which I hate the term because it goes into general revenue, not schools. But I guess it's more palatable to call it the school tax. That's a provincial mill rate, and that's gone up. As I understand it, the rate has risen, but something else has changed that impacts owners.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, that's correct. They have changed the policy in which they calculate school tax rates. So our understanding is that instead of basing it on inflationary increases on the provincial school tax levy, that it's now going to be based on nominal GDP changes. As of right now, it's really unclear as to what that actually means or what type of impact it will have. But what we do know is that it has resulted in an increase year over year when compared to 2025.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the question is the tax rate bylaw. Anything else? No. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
The next item on the agenda is a report of the General Manager, Planning and Development regarding proposed approach to replace existing high-density zones and associated rental incentives to align with provincial housing legislation, with a presentation by Planner 3 and Planner 3, and the recommendation is before you on screen.
Planner 3, you're first.
Good evening, Mayor Council. My name is Kristen Patton. I am a senior planner for the city's Community Planning Division. And my name is Natasha Locke. I'm also a senior planner at the city's Community Planning Division. So we are presenting tonight on the proposed approach to high-density zones and rental incentives. Before we get started tonight, I want to acknowledge that this was very much a cross-departmental effort, and we're very grateful for all the work and the time and the collaboration of the various people who put this together tonight. So our purpose tonight is twofold. First, we're seeking feedback from Council on the proposed new high-density zones and rental incentives, including the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. And then second, we're seeking direction to proceed with consultation with industry and community, as outlined in the report and required by the provincial legislation pertaining to density bonus. So I'm going to start by laying the foundation with some background. So in 2017, the city established the current rental incentives program with direction to enhance the program in 2023. And that program really set the stage for Coquitlam as a leader in encouraging the development of rental housing. Then in late 2023, mid-2024, the province passed new housing legislation with widespread impacts, including to the city's existing density bonus rental incentive programs and thereby our high density zones. So again, in Coquitlam, we've had a very successful system of incentivizing rental through density bonus, where we've had incremental increases or density steps beyond a base density of 2.5 floor area ratio, or FAR. And those density steps were used to secure contributions to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, or ARF, incentivize the construction of rental housing, and then we also use density bonus to generate revenues for community amenities. And I'll just clarify here that floor area ratio is a measure of the gross floor area times the lot area. So while that system has been very successful, we now need a new approach because of provincial legislative changes, including the introduction of new tools to fund amenities, the mandated minimum densities within transit-oriented areas, or TOAs, as well as new rules for how density bonus can be used.
So with that context in mind, the next slides will walk you through at a high level the proposed high density zones, including the revised rental incentives through density bonus. So based on prior council direction, there are 4 high-level principles that guided the development of the city's revised approach to density and rental incentives. And they are: generate funding for growth-related amenities and infrastructure, maintain development viability across market cycles, support the delivery of market and below-market rental and non-market housing, and ensure clear, consistent, and efficient administration. By following these principles, the intent is to achieve similar outcomes to the existing incentive model. Before I speak to the proposed high-density zones and rental incentives, I'd like to highlight the high-density land use areas that the proposed zones are consistent with. All high-density land use areas are shown in pink and brown on the maps included in Attachment 2 to the report. On your screen is a snip of those maps showing the high-density land use areas in Coquitlam. The land uses shown are proposed to be maintained, with the exception of properties designated high-density residential in transit-oriented areas Tier 1. Most of those properties are proposed to be redesignated to transit-oriented mixed use, and that's to align with provincial requirements, to support the creation of more commercial space, and provide the density required to apply rental incentives and maintain housing choice. So rather than amending our existing zones, staff proposed to introduce the provincial minimum allowable densities and revise rental incentives that align with provincial requirements through 4 new high-density zones that are consistent with our official community plan high-density land use spectrum, as shown on your screen. Like the current approach, the proposed approach to density and rental incentives includes a commercial requirement where that's applicable in our mixed-use zones, base residential density that can be developed as any residential tenure, and that is subject to amenity cost charges. And the base density in each of the zones aligns with the provincial minimum allowable densities in transit-oriented areas where applicable. And then at the option of the developer, bonus density that can be accessed in exchange for secured purpose-built rental housing, including an affordable housing contribution. It is proposed that no amenity cost charges are payable on rental in the bonus density, and this is in line with the current approach that exempts rental incentives from density bonus payments. Additional details for each zone can be found in attachment 2 to the report.
So focusing in on the affordable housing contribution, in the old system we included 0.2 FAR of affordable housing units. So this approach is carried forward here, but with additional flexibility for the developer to deliver units or provide a financial contribution to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. So providing an example of what this means. So in the scenario on the screen, the developer could build 7 non-market units, or they could build 7 strata units and then provide a contribution to the ARF of approximately $2 million in this case. Of note, the city will continue to promote the development of in-kind units, particularly in large multi-building developments. So altogether, our proposed approach to the ARF works within the limits of the current legislative context. It's a market responsive solution, so it offers flexibility, but it also continues current practices regarding units and ARF revenues. And then also we would review this approach as part of the Affordable Housing Strategy update in 2027, once we've received some feedback from the market and had an opportunity to test it in practice. A final key point to highlight is that the legislation requires us to do a financial feasibility analysis, which Council must take into consideration when making its decision about new bylaws using density bonus. The analysis was undertaken by an external consultant who looks specifically at how the base and the bonus would perform under our current difficult market conditions and development realities. And then we also use the current density bonus program as a benchmark, so we compare the performance of the current or outgoing program to the proposed approach. And what the analysis showed is that the proposed approach performs comparably or modestly better from a financial feasibility testing perspective than the current program. At first reading, we will provide additional details on the results from the financial feasibility assessment for Council's consideration as required by the legislation.
So should Council direct us to proceed with consultation, we will return to Council to report back on what we heard and to bring forward bylaws and bylaw amendments to implement the proposed approach that incorporates both Council and public feedback where possible. So in closing, the recommendation before you in short is that Council direct staff to proceed with consultation with industry and community as outlined in the report and as required by legislation. We also welcome Council feedback on the proposed high-density zones and revised rental incentives. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got questions from 4 members of Council now, so I've got Councillor John.
Thanks, and start off by saying I recognize this work was very complicated, so thank you to staff for has been years of work of trying to implement the various provincial legislation that has been dropped down on us. And I also appreciate that there's a deadline here of June 30th, so we got first reading, consultations, get this through into bylaws, because to not have this in place post June 30th that's a non-starter. So I'm going to support it tonight, but there are still a number of concerns I have here that I really believe need to be ironed out, and it starts with the ARF. So maybe we can go back to slide 12. So we all would agree on this We want affordable units. We don't want cash. We don't need cash to just be sitting on it. I get that in some developments there could be scenarios where you might have a very limited number of below market units that are produced. It makes sense to do the cash because getting the nonprofit, there's a bit of a critical mass here that needs to be there of units. But what I do not want to see is that a developer who might be required to do 6, 7, 8, 20 below market units is opting out for cash. That cannot be an option here. So whatever policy work we need to do separate from this is very important, that this not be an option presented to developers, but rather saying, this is the line, you cross this line, there's a formula of how these things are produced with a certain amount of FAR. If you achieve that and these amount of below market units, you are building them, you cannot pay out of it. So any comments from staff on how we can build that policy around ensuring that we're gonna actually get the units built?
Through the chair to Councillor John. So yes, so the intention is that as we start to actually experience this in practice in terms of how this starts to work and as we move through the rest of the year, the intention is to look at policy options around how to best set policy expectations and help make sure that we're getting the right balance. Part of this is that things are currently very uncertain, and so we want to make sure that we're maintaining a level of flexibility while we try out some of the new systems, but that we anticipate that we'll need to have some policy pieces put in place to help support how and when cash in lieu can be delivered and how many strata units, because the other challenge is, of course, particularly to smaller development, then you need a minimum number of units to make it viable to support nonprofit housing. So there's a threshold in both directions that we need to give consideration for, and yes, that will likely be as part of our policy work going forward.
Thank you for that. I just want to go now to the rental piece. Previously, we've had a market for many years where, no question, developers were going to build as much as they could. They were going to achieve all of the incentives that we laid out that produce the market rental units that we've desperately needed. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing developers now have conversations about maybe not wanting projects where they're going to be exposed for 10 years, which means that we might still get towers, but they might be smaller. Where they're going to need now, with the lack of overseas pre-sales and local pre-sales, where they're going to need to perhaps do something smaller to get their financing. I'm just concerned that what we're also going to get here is we'll get the base residential, but we're not going to be getting the rental. So I'll support it as it is now, but we need to very much watch how this advances, because if we start to see and have projects come forward that aren't actually taking up that extra rental, what are we going to be saying as council? I know in the past there's been one case of where an applicant came forward, they didn't use all of the incentives that were put in front of them, council sent it back. This could become something more frequent. And I'd rather be upfront with the developers by saying, okay, here's your requirement of rental versus, okay, here's your incentive, and then it's an incentive. They might not like to do those incentives. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with the layout still. I've had some challenges with this. We'll see how it goes. I know uncertain market, things are very fluid right now, but I think we have to have a close eye on this. And we do need to develop just some firmer policy around the ARF and when developers can actually opt to use cash in lieu instead of building units. Thanks.
Councillor Mars. Thank you very much. So just a couple of things I want to touch on first off. Page 4, it speaks to the incentive program that was in place. 23% of all new housing units was purpose-built rental between 18 and 24. So I think that's testament to the fact that the pieces we had in place were working. For nearly 40 years, we didn't have rental housing built in Coquitlam, unless we had aging stock. I think the first one we had was Charlotte and Blue Mountain, 41 units, and that was one of the first ones in 40 years. So right in that window. But now, to see we've approved 9,700, almost 9,800, 3,000 below market, and 4,500 are actually under construction or completed, I think speaks again to the leadership of our staff and our council to make it happen. So thank you for that. One of the criticisms I've always had of the whole program was the mixed tenure buildings. And so much of what we were doing was tied to market. Yes, you build a house, a rental, but the market housing had to work, strata condo. And when that slows, so does the rental. That's exactly what we're seeing. So, similar to my colleague, Councilor Jolich, concern about, do we get delivery on these units? Can we go back to this slide 12 where the numbers again? I'm less concerned about the cash in lieu if we figured out a path in which how we're going to use the money. That's going to be the key. Because at this point in time, developers are having a challenge getting approved for financing. Resale market's not there. The banks, Canadian legislation has certain pieces in place with regard to their capital requirements. So they're just not qualified. So it was at a space where typically 50 to 65% of projects had to be sold out before they get their financing. That's problematic. So as a corollary to this, I think what we're going to need is identify how we will use the cash in lieu, figure out how we flow that into, similar to what we've done with not-for-profits, how do we jumpstart some of those projects and help them pencil, help them get their financing. I think that's critical. As well, the one group that's been left off the hook in all this discussion has been the financiers, the bankers. So, when we talk about a fiscal financial feasibility, the banks have typical rules. The project has to have a certain percentage of profit, or they don't fund it. So when you say that you want councils to understand it, you're going to see councillors that will cringe at the amount of profit that needs to be in a project to get its financing. And I can foresee people making arbitrary decisions around the council table and say, let's just ask for more of this. Oh, they're making too much, dial this back. We've seen it in other cities. We've got to be very, very cautious it doesn't happen here. So from an advocacy perspective, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And perhaps that's a piece we bring somebody in to take a look at. How do we keep a project whole? How do we utilize our incentives to help a project proceed? Because our greatest success in the rental is not been mixed tenure, not a strata unit and a couple of rentals in it. It's transferring all those rental units off to a standalone rental building where there are programs to fund. So I had a meeting this morning talking to some individuals, and we were talking about building 5,000 purpose-built rentals through a program, through a federal program, because there's funding for it. If we try to force it to fit, we'll fail. So I'm just going to leave it with staff to figure out what we might do, what needs to be true, that we can get some additional information to ensure that the money we're collecting is used and that we don't run into this situation of 40 years again of no rental housing being constructed. So that's a big one. Page 7 of our report talks about the capital cost. I do have some challenges with that because when we start talking about capital costs, these are very fluid numbers. So when you go out, I think you got to be asking, how often are you going to be updating those numbers? Is it an annual update where we know what the cost per square foot is? Is it quarterly? The life cycle of an application from pre-app through to final approval, unfortunately, can take several years. So what numbers are we going to use in terms of that capital cost? So I think there's going to be a lot more clarity needed around that as you move this forward. So some great work. I am absolutely choked that we've had to spend so much staff time and resources on this over the last year and a half as a result of some arbitrary numbers that the province has come up with. What we're doing was working. It was acknowledged as working. We've said this before. I'm sorry to my colleagues for repeating it, but we knew it was working. It was acknowledged by those that it was working. And then arbitrarily, our provincial government said, no, here's what you can do. got people in the room tonight that are impacted by those decisions, and that's why they're here, to talk about another topic foisted upon us by irresponsible legislation. So I'll stop there for this. I appreciate the work of staff. I look forward to the consultation, the feedback from industry and public. And more importantly, I really look forward to seeing what can be done to get some hard numbers behind the scenes so we can see how do we ensure this stuff gets built and not just sit on planning paper somewhere. Thanks.
Councilor Mendel.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I also want to thank staff for all the work that you put in to come to this point that we're at. And I echo the points that this was forced on us, and we had to react. And I think from the beginning, we talked about having a men in Coquitlam approach. And this report shows how creative we were in trying to make us whole, in trying to, put a square into a circle, pretty much. So thank you for all that work. But I have a couple of questions. One is in regards to the consulting that you mentioned. We are coming from a place whereby we're being led by the legislation, and there's already requirements for us to fulfill. Now we're going to the community. Are we going to be adamant to let them know that there is part of the consultation that is going to be to inform, say we don't have a choice, this is what is required of us, and then we can hear from them based on the parts that maybe we can listen to them. Because what I fear is that we go out to consult and people always think it's a two-way street, right? To where we listen to them and they expect us to implement it. The legislation is already there. So there are some things that we are not going to be able to change. Do we have a plan to have one part of it being engaging to inform, and then engaging to collect feedback on only the aspects that we can change? That's the first question.
So we'll have a Let's Talk page that's available to the public that kind of frames up what the proposed changes are and highlights what we're required to do under the legislation. That Let's Talk page will include question and answer, so if questions do come up, we can also, of course, clarify where needed, what is kind of in our control right now and what is something that we are required to do by the legislation as those kind of questions come up as well. We can provide that clarification.
So I'm going to just perhaps change the way that we normally engage. Instead of waiting for questions, I think we're going to have a lot of disappointed residents because people don't have time to read everything and they might not come to us with questions. We have to inform, in this case, that the legislation is already there, right? So I think maybe we need to change the way that we approach this consultation this time because there are things that we just, as a city, there's nothing we can do, right? So I'm just going to leave it with you on that one. The second thing I wanted to comment on is the cash in lieu. I don't have a problem with it because as a city, we have been very transparent and we've been very responsive and responsible, and we've got amazing staff that we as council always know what you're doing. So I don't have a problem because it's an affordable housing fund, and we as council can continue to get the reports and can continue to ask questions of what's happening. So I think given that you are going to find some developments that have restraints one way or the other, it could be the form or shape of the building to where they cannot provide whatever we are asking for. So instead of forcing it and making the development not be able to go forward, I would rather we give the cash in lieu and let the development go on, and then we make a decision on the fund differently. We do the same when we do density transfers, right? So this is another way of looking to be creative and to be able to make sure that we move these projects forward. The last thing I wanted to comment on was when we're making these policies, we cannot think about, let's say that, we have to think about the financial. I know there are other cities that actually go and look at the pro formas. I don't think we want to get to that, to where we are actually looking at the pro forma us to see if the development is going to go forward, and then make our decision. That's going to be a lot of time, staff, and it's going to pull us away from the work that we do. One thing that Coquitlam has, and I hope we continue to have, is to have that good relationship with the development community, to where they're open to us and they're going, where you're going there, this is the impact that's going to happen. And I know we have a table where we have always put them in, and with the consultation that we're going to do, we'll possibly hear it from them. So let's continue to do that. But for us, we cannot make reactive policies. We have to make policies knowing the hardships that are there right now will be gone tomorrow, and these policies are going to stay. So what is it that is going to withstand in test of time? So let's make responsible policies. Yes, Stuart.
Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Chair, and through to Councilor Mandeo. No, just wanted to touch on your very astute last point. So our intent is that the financial feasibility of the program has been assessed to be viable for the majority of developments. We're not doing individual site-by-site or project-by-project analyses. And like many of our policies, we'd like to think of them as living documents. And as the market changes and evolves over the future, we can adjust the policy as necessary through, again, engagement with industry and residents and council to tweak where necessary, so that we can always try to keep our finger on the pulse.
I'd love to hear that. I think that's the only way that we can go forward. Otherwise, you have people that are listening on the other side that will say, well, they always listen to the developers. And it's always the developers that win, but that's not the approach that we take from people. So I just wanted to mention that. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor Hodge.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll start by again thanking staff for putting this together. This was a lot of work and a lot of time spent trying to fix something that wasn't broken. And now we're trying to get something that's going to be, it's probably not going to be as good as what we had before, but that's the cards we've been dealt. So thank you, and recognize that you're under a tight time frame to be getting this work done. So again, that's one of the reasons why it's here before us tonight. Slide 12. My concern on this one here is, again, because the province has raised the base residential up so high, that under the current market conditions, I think that Councillor John may have touched on this, is that are we going to see anything in the bonus area? Will the developers just build to what they can build to under the present legislation and not put any more money or build a bonus market rental, the very stuff that we're trying to actually get built? So maybe just comment on that. I mean, is that one of the risks here, that they may not actually build the stuff that we want?
Through the chair to Councillor Hodge. So similar to our current approach, anything above the base is incentives. It's an incentive for purpose-built rental housing. So we've looked to try and mimic our current approach, which also is incentive-based. It's at the option of the developer to take up that purpose-built rental. And I think there'll be a lot of factors that play into that decision, being current market and things like that. So the intent is for this to kind of be a policy that withstands sort of those fluctuations in the market.
And hopefully the incentive is there.
Mr. Oliver.
Yes, thank you. And just to support the team, right now nothing works, just to be honest, nothing's building. So you can develop whatever you want, it's not, whatever frameworks, that doesn't work right now. What we do know from history is when the market returns, all of the developments that were being built were actually building into the incentive area. That's what we knew back when the market was good. This fulfills the same type of approach. Now, there's going to be some key differences because the provincial legislation has constraints on this, right? The capital cost to deliver units, or the cash yield cost, is going to be much higher now for developers than it was before. That creates both an incentive for them to build because they want to put that much money up, but also potentially a disincentive in case that they have a few units they don't want to package within a building. We're going to have to work through this. Those constraints are provincially mandated. We're going to see how that works. Really, until the market comes back, the true testing of our system isn't going to be able to be completed. But we believe that if you look at what we've been before the economic downturn, this system would continue to fulfill what we had before. That's all we can go on, and we feel strongly that this will help. But I know there's been a number of questions on the cash in lieu. it's going to be something we're going to have to figure out, because frankly, it's a different system, and it is much more money the developers have to put up. As previously, they put up, or the ARF contribution in a tower, for example, was much lower than it would be today if you look at a cash flow contribution. So there'll be a different incentive that they'll have to, the number of different levers they'll be pulling in terms of how to manage. If you looked at the last couple of projects we did get through council, they did a tower and then a 6-story wood frame building where they contained all the non-market or below market. That's really the approach developers are taking. They know our approach here. We're comfortable that they'll continue to use that system to achieve those type of outcomes.
And thank you for that. My concern is the disincentive side. I mean, we probably could not have picked the worst time, or they could not have picked the worst time to implement this, because nothing's getting built on. So I'm worried that we can offer incentives, but if the approach isn't as good, or they're not going to take the risk, they may just say, I'm just going to build to the base, and I'm not going to take the risk to go any higher or do anything more.
Now, in a bad market like this one, having an inclusionary zoning requirement wouldn't be any better. It just wouldn't build because it's too much cost. And unfortunately, as council knows, we've got a June 31st deadline. We've got to hit, and we are forced to bring this forward at a time when we'd rather not do so. We believe an incentive-based system has always gotten us a lot of really goodwill in the community, in the development community. They have built to the highest levels through incentive-based thinking and buying land on that basis. We believe they will do so again. Just have to be patient.
Yeah, and we had that certainty. And to Councilor Rodeo's point, we always did provide a certainty. That there wasn't any negotiating. Developers went in knowing this is the price, this is what I can pay for my land and still make the profit. And as Councilor Marsden said, without profit, there's no building. So as much as we often hear in the community that developers are making tons of money, and maybe there were good times when they were, but right now the challenge is if they can't hit a certain profitability, they don't get the financing. They can't go to foreign buyers to do a lot of pre-sales, so they're really locked in. We're not getting anything built. I do like the cash and lieu idea. I think that works, providing that we get that money and we can spend it on the types of housing that we want. That's the key to that program. Otherwise, it's just, as Marcel, I can say, just money sitting in the bank. We need the below market housing. We need the below market rental, and we've got to make sure that these programs that you're putting in place are going to deliver what we want and what we need at a time that the market isn't good. Councilor Medeo touched on it, and that's the flexibility. And obviously, we're not going to be reviewing each project pro forma, but that flexibility is into the program that we're building and the method that we're putting together. At what point do we go and look at that flexibility? Is this something we're going to have to review annually because the market is changing so wildly? Is the program we put together 6 months ago not going to work today? And how much time are we going to have to go back for tweaking the process?
Through the chair to Councillor Hodge. So the idea with the way that we set up this program is sort of in two component parts. The first is that for the rates to determine the cash in lieu, those would be reviewed annually to ensure that because they are, as I forget which, I think it might have been Marsden, noted that it was point in time, and so that does create a challenge. And so in order to make sure that we're on top of where the market is, we would check those rates on an annual basis. In terms of the program, the holistic of the program, this idea of being incentive-based and these kinds of things, we can review this as council requests, or if we notice things as operationally as we're implementing the program, if there's little tweaks along the way that we need to bring forward, we will do so. But the idea being that this program allows us to be flexible enough to manage all the uncertainty that we're seeing in today's market conditions, while also setting a clear and consistent framework and having that be evaluated on an annual basis to make sure that those rates are in check.
I think that's all we can do. It speaks to that point about predictability. We could have a developer sort of say, well, I'm not going to build it for the next 6 months because I'm hoping that they're going to review the process again. So that flexibility almost becomes a negotiating point If it's not a negotiating point, it's certainly going to be a factor in determining at what point they pull the trigger and start to actually build the housing we need. Whether finance or the point where the bank says, hold off because your numbers don't work right.
And this is, through the chair, this is an unprecedented time. I don't think I've seen this. Developers will say that 30 years, we've never seen a market like this. And I think you would probably agree with me that even the best system that we had, our current system, bonus density, which is wildly successful, wouldn't be effective right now either. Right? It's just the market. The market is to a point where land, values at zero. So there's a point in which we always continue to evaluate how things work. Fundamentally, at some point, the market's going to have to shift. Or we're going to need support from the federal, provincial government to, to reduce infrastructure costs and effectively bail out the development industry. If this were to continue for a few more years, there's lots of things that may happen. From our perspective, right now, I would say even the best system is going to be locked in to economic factors that we do not control: geopolitical, tariffs, our own housing slowdown, current market rates, interest rates, you name it. And at some point, we get these slowdowns and they happen. This is an extended one. We don't overreact. We've been tweaking our system, but frankly, we're going to need a more substantial change in the market for the market to come back. And I would say even the best systems would suffer from not being effective today.
Okay, thank you. I'll just reiterate, it's about getting the housing that we want. And that's the below market, the affordable housing, the rental, and I'm afraid that that's where we're going to suffer, and at least in the current market conditions. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Desicqua. Councilor Mazzarello.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Stewart, and again, I'll echo my colleagues. Thank you, staff, for this report. I know it's been challenging work under a tight deadline with respect to what the province has put us under. I'll try to not repeat what's already been said, but I just want to highlight a couple of things, and I'll do it quickly. Page 4 was commented around the table about the system we had before the province made their mandates. Page 4, the first full paragraph there says everything you need to say with regards to the rental that was being built, purpose-built rental, below market rental. It was a successful program. It was working. This wasn't needed for our city. If the province was more targeted with respect to what they were requiring other cities that were laggards when it came to building housing, it would have been a better approach, but they decided otherwise. And unfortunately, we had to do work that was not needed for our city. I just want to pick up on Councillor Marsden's comment about the first purpose-built rental that was built in Coquitlam in a few decades, being, I think it's the residences on Blue Mountain in Charlotte. I have a friend that lived there for a couple of years. So, people we know and we grew up with, or at least for me, had access to housing. That's why it was important, and it was a system that was working. It should not have been thrown out, but I love you. I want to talk about I think if you go to slide, earlier slide that kind of compares the two systems. A little bit earlier, yeah. So this one doesn't quite show where we have the ARF and the market rental, but it somewhat does. There's been some talk around the table here with respect to developers not maybe accessing the ARF components because it's in the above the base. We've seen what it would look like if we put it in the base. And essentially what it means is that more projects become unviable through economics. So our choices were essentially very limited here. It was push the viability of projects further down the road, essentially, or make it harder, get less housing, which I just spoke about we need, or put it in, or do it the way we've decided to go, which means developers may not choose to access it, which would be a shame, but at least the project is more viable, but you will get more housing. So that's the challenge we were confronted with. I think we landed on the right answer. It still doesn't necessarily mean we have to like the answer. I will echo a comment that was made. If developers think that they're going to come to council on large developments that can accommodate below market rentals, and want to do cash in lieu instead, they're going to be in for a rough ride. So if any of them are listening, I would encourage them that when their project is significantly large enough, and staff will determine when that is, when they meet with the developers and they look over the proposal, that they go with the build out as opposed to the cash in lieu. I agree with the comment, we'd rather have the units rather than the cash. Saying that, I do think we are going to get a significant amount of cash when it comes to this with the new ARF. We are going to need a program on how we spend it. It cannot pool up in a reserve over time where it's not being used. Otherwise, it's not serving the purpose for which it is there for. The last comment I'll make, and it hasn't been touched on, it's just something that's always bothered me. It's even in our current system.
District 1.
Yes, through the chair. I just want to touch on that point is that one of the things that we are hoping for is new announcements relative to the different programs that would support the ARF. The ARF used to help when we had the CHF fund, which the province has now stalled at least.
Repaced.
Repaced. And as such, we're hoping, if there's new funding mechanisms or different ways that we'll be able to try to align this the ARF is a flexible enough program that we should be able to work with those, but we do need those senior government programs to come to the table.
Appreciate that. Okay, the second last one I just wanted to touch on quickly. It's in our current system. It's always bothered me. I struggle with the reduction in amenity space for rental as composed to strata. To me, it treats those who live in rental properties differently than it treats those who own their strata lot. It just something doesn't sit right with me when it comes to that. I understand it's there as an incentive. It doesn't sit right for me. Both owners of properties and those who rent pay property taxes. If you're a renter, you pay property taxes through your rent. So you both have every right to use public facilities, public parks, you name it. But when we are requiring less amenity space for a certain type of build out, certain type of tenure, it will put more stress on our public facilities because they don't have the same access to it in their own development. I've mentioned it before. I don't know if the consensus is here to change it. I doubt it. It just always doesn't sit right with me. The last one I will talk about is with regards to attachment 405, page 101. We're going out to consultation now. It's required. I am happy to see staff, when I see development sector and nonprofit sector, staff have broadened the scope of who they're going to talk to. It's not just UDI. I think this is long overdue that we talk to other building associations, we talk to the nonprofits. Why? I'll put it generously and kindly. They give a broader scope. They have a more holistic view on what is required as opposed to a lobby group. So I'm happy that staff are going that direction. I think we need to do more of that. So thank you and good luck, and let's get the feedback from the public and from stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kim has presented myself. Councillor Kim.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stewart. Thank you very much. I was looking at the bylaw, the bylaws and the dates. It's been 3 years. I guess we started this journey in 2023. Sorry, not the bylaws, the bills, I should say. It has been quite the journey, so I appreciate all the work that's been done. I know for a while I would continue to think about the previous regime and the model that we had, and that was working. But there was one thing that I think all of us understood, is that our team would be able to find a new path within the rules of the framework that have been put forward to us under the new housing legislation. So thank you very much for all the work on this and to see where we are. I'll try not to repeat as well, but I think the cash in lieu is a big piece. Certainly, I think it's going to be a big part of it, but when I look at the report, in addition to the attachment 3, and especially page 3 of 4, it really does focus on the larger projects and how things will, you'll be encouraged to have the units. So my question to you is, how strong of an encouragement? I think we're hearing it around the table that we want definitely the units to be built, but how would that look, encouragement, if they just want to go straight to cash in lieu, what could that look? How could we encourage this?
Through the chair to Councillor Kim, as Mr. St. Croix mentioned earlier, so our intent is to look towards developing policy related to this. We're at this point in time looking to meet that deadline. And so the intent is that we would work on a better policy for that. So it's not just encouraged, but it's a bit more clear and laid out.
Okay. And I was wondering about that too, in the sense of, say if they, I appreciate that, and then looking at 7 non-market units, say if they go for that. Looking ahead at what some of these housing agreements can look like, how has consideration, or at least thought, what will the service providers or the nonprofit providers be like? How will that potentially play out for these new units?
With the chair to the councillor. So I think when we're developing the policy, there's a number of different considerations. One is from the developer side in terms of what kind of makes sense for them in terms of developing in kind or cash in lieu, what we want to see, whether that's a standalone building or if it's part of a larger tower. But then also the nonprofit operator is a consideration as well in terms of what's a viable number of units for them to be able to operate collectively, what's kind of a threshold for them. So I think that part of the consideration in developing the policy will be to consider a range of different factors when coming up with something that's going to guide something that actually works in practice for us.
And in the current states, what some real life examples of some of the nonprofit operators that we have, what's the lowest amount of units they've had that you can think of in a project? 2, maybe. Just more out of curiosity.
Mr. Singh.
Through the chair, typically what we've seen is that 6 is kind of the minimum threshold to make something viable for a nonprofit. It does depend on the size of their organization and the specifics of the operations, but the average is usually 6 as a minimum. The other thing that I'll just add on to some of the conversation here is that we have traditionally had an MOU with BC Housing around supporting the operations of our non-market and below market units, and so that has further also helped sort of manage when you have such a large entity. It helps when they only have small bits here and there because they can pull that together and support those types of units. Again, we'll be looking at sort of what those thresholds are to sort of set a minimum, maximum, what is that guiding space, and then that will help us with sort of a criteria to help council make decisions.
I appreciate that. I know with our deadline of June coming up, I'm probably going into some areas that we'll have some further discussion as well. But with that, I look forward to the discussion on the new LARF and seeing what can be done with that as well. So with that being said, thank you very much. Moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Rasmus. Yeah, staff, we'll go to slide 12 here, please. And to staff, I want to thank you for, again, the work. I think you mentioned it earlier, we're trying to create a program that mimics what we had financially before, so that development pay for those amenities that because we don't get that amenity, that means that to build amenities, we have to put it on the taxpayer. And that's not what we've been trying to avoid. We've always said development should pay for development. What's happened with the provincial government and of lately is developers wanted to offload a lot of things, and UDI, the former head, said that the taxpayer should pick it up. And we've always said, well, no, we've created a system before that had it paid through development, through density bonus, which is a very good system, as you've heard. Now, in this scenario, what I want to point out, and we're talking about bonus market rental or a bonus, which is voluntary. So if you make it too onerous or too many conditions to it, it will not be viable or financial. So I think when we talk about certain regulations and amendments,
demands or whatever, we will not then achieve, I think, what we want to do. So I think we have to be very clear on how this goes forward and how it is realistic what we can hopefully get built. Because if we make it too demanding, the developers say, I'll just build below that and I won't go up any higher because it's not financially viable for me to go past that point. So, and you heard from Councilor Marston the difficulties of getting the financing for this. And the smaller the developer you are, the more requirements, the higher levels of profitability or return, rather than the bigger developer. Because the bigger developer generally has more capital and experience and track record to do it. So there's always this game between the two. So I want us to get rental. I want it to work. I've been here a long time, and we created a program that really outdid anybody else in the region per capita for our size of equipment. But the rest of the issue, though, also is if the province doesn't come in with funding for non-market, below market, it won't work. And the province just recently, in their last budget, has cut $1.5 billion to $2 billion funding that we were relying on. Projects that had already been approved for funding, and I don't know where a couple of ours are right now, other have been pulled. In Burnaby, Brisbane, Delta, I think Coquitlam also, that what we were going to do for seniors housing, non-market, below market, is stalled. It's done. And so the province doesn't come back. But even before this legislation came in, cities in BC, the whole province, had about 13,000 housing units, non-market, below market, gone through their processes, gone through their systems, waiting on the province to come up with that funding to make it work. And they never came up with it. So local governments in this area have been doing their job throughout the province to move forward for non-market, below market, and rental housing. The only reason we're in this situation, the federal government, for 45 years, we're not in this game until it became a critical situation. Unfortunately, with the market the way it is, I think Mr. Alaveda explained some of that. We're not getting housing built. We still have a housing crisis. That housing crisis, is, I think that my planners here would agree, is only going to get more severe because we have no new housing coming on at the rate that we need it. So we're in a situation. My question, though, question for you is that the ARF program. The ARF program was always designed, when we had it before, to help pay down the per door cost to make it more affordable. So in our cash in lieu, whatever cash we would, I would assume that you would be designing a program in a similar way, because we had a cap, I think about $20,000 per door to pay in our fund, depending on the program. So I think, would that be a similar type of program that you'd be looking for the cash in lieu, without the full details, but roughly would that be the same?
Through the chair to the councillor. So the intention is to use the current policy to guide the spending for the cash in lieu coming into, we'll have to create a separate reserve fund, but we can have the same policy guide the spending of that reserve fund to the most, for the most part, with a few limitations that are in the legislation that the funding needs to go towards the capital cost of constructing the affordable housing, which is what we currently do for the most part anyway. And our current policy allows for either kind of deepening the affordability or kind of bridging the gap in terms of viability. But as has been mentioned, the key piece that's missing right now is the programs that have been paused or canceled, such as the community housing plan.
Yes, and I think what you're saying is we don't need to rewrite a new policy. We have a policy, we just need to tweak it. And to the public out there, once again, affordable, non-market, below market, market rental is the need of the federal government and the province to step up to make it happen. We can't put it on the backs of our taxpayers here. We can't afford that. The development can't do it on their backs because that would just be adding that cost. You would have to, all the people in the market condo units would then have to pay more to to subsidize the units that are non-market and below market. You're just creating increased pricing, making things even more unaffordable for our young people trying to get in the housing market. And that's what we're trying to deal with today. So I think you've done an excellent job with the hand we've been dealt by the province. And this will go out for consultation. This is complicated. Our councils are on the table. They have a better understanding, but we'll go out. I do agree with Councillor Mazzarolo that more than UEI, it has to go out to all different agencies that have an interest in it and people have an interest in this. But you've done a tremendous job bringing us to a system where it matches, hopefully, not completely, we'll still not be gaining the same amount of revenue as we did before, but this is about the best we will be able to do in this system. So once again, both of you and all the staff involved in this, thank you very much for all the hard work and time that you've had to spend on this.
Thank you, and I'll echo the thanks from all my colleagues. People who become skilled at planning and spend years, decades learning the trade, practicing the trade. Don't want to get stuck in jumping through provincial hoops that aren't constructive. In the case of Coquitlam's housing program for the last 10 years, the 2023 changes gutted the program in large measure. And I don't think there obviously wasn't a conscious decision to do that, but it meant that in order to solve the problem they felt they had in a few communities, they made it so that the communities that were building a lot of housing could no longer do it. And so we use acronyms up here all the time. ARF is Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. If you put slide 5 up again, Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. I'm not as opposed to the idea, but certainly on larger projects that can secure the housing, build the housing. But cash in lieu is not a bad thing either, because typically the ARF contribution to an affordable housing project was the last 10 cents of a dollar. We all hear from nonprofit providers that say, we just can't make this work, even if the land is free, we can't make it work because we're too tight. We don't have that last 10% or whatever in order to make the project work and break ground on it. So it's the same thing with the development sector. We're talking about a market right now that's incredibly tight. Normally build housing when right up until marginal cost equals marginal revenue, which is the same as every economics teacher can tell. Or in the case of development, marginal cost of marginal risk equals marginal revenue. But if marginal cost, marginal risk is higher than marginal revenue, the project doesn't get built. Even if it's only a penny higher, it can't get financed, it won't be built. And that's what we're seeing right now is projects that aren't being built at all. In fact, we talk about rental housing. In the 70s, there were federal programs to incentivize rental housing, and there were lots of rental housing built in the 70s right through to the middle of the 80s. And then right across the province, it wasn't just in Coquitlam, the rental housing stopped being built. One of the big builders of rental housing was Cressy, still in business. Norm Cressy was a large developer, and it was actually the only rental project that I remember in that 40-year span, and it was only to replace a building that had burnt down. They had a rental project, it caught fire on one of the buildings, and they replaced it, but no other purpose-built rental was being built in Coquitlam until we were able to convert the bonus density. If you look at the first tower here, by base density, it meant that near SkyTrain, a property came with 2.5 floor space ratio. Not very much. Builders typically buy land based on dollars per buildable foot. So if base density allowed 100,000 square feet to be built, it would be $14 million to buy the land. You'd work it out based on the amount that you could spend on land per buildable foot. And so we could allow them to build more if we asked them for things, and they gave us things. And it was either cash in many cases, some of which went into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, but also childcare facilities and other build below market rent, and they had the incentives to do it, and the developers that really otherwise wouldn't have had any interest that were building rental housing and building non-market rental housing at a cost that didn't get imposed on the rest of the occupants of the building, because this was bonus density. When the rules changed 2.5 years ago, they moved to the light blue box moved over, so they took up all of the available, almost all of the available density. And so the developers got lots of windfall profit. If they already owned land near the SkyTrain station, the land itself went up and doubled in value in some cases. And it was really frustrating because we also all had to contend with all of the hoops that we had to dedicate a lot of staff to, and we thank them again for the commitment that they made to go in and we got to make these rule changes by last December, and by this June 30th. And we've got all these deadlines, so we're changing meetings and adding special meetings in order to meet the deadlines of the legislative program. That was intended to spur, I assume, intended to spur development, but it had the opposite effect. And that combined with some market realities south of the border and some other challenges. The housing industry has pressed pause. The housing finance sector has pressed pause. You can't finance projects. If you could finance them, the necessity to pre-sales to a certain percentage pretty much cripples a lot of the projects. We have nothing being built. Some council colleagues went to a groundbreaking 2 weeks ago, and it was the first groundbreaking I've been to in a year. Used to go to groundbreaking every week. I get invited to 2 or 3, but they don't make it to 1. So we solved the challenge of no rental housing being built, and we had spurred a lot of other development of housing that was much needed by the province. And today, we desperately need the housing, but we don't have any market. We don't have a market that's ready to absorb the housing, and there's no financing available to build it. And at the same time, while we used to be able to include some below market and non-market rental housing in there at no cost to any level of government, we can't do that anymore, really, except through the program that's before us now, and I hope it is sufficient to incentivize a fraction of what we used to be able to get out of the bonus density program as it existed before. So now we can't contribute as much, if anything, to affordable housing in the community. And at the same time, the provincial budget just canceled the community housing fund, which was the massive fund that was intended to pay for the non-market, low market rental housing that we needed. We desperately need, I won't put it in past tense, we need that housing. So it wasn't intended, but the result is that there's almost no housing being built now. There's a little bit of rental being built. We're trying our best to incentivize, get out of the way of those that can break ground on a new project, but it is incredibly challenging. So, last comment, 30 years ago I was the founding chair of the Society for Housing Affordability in BC. Its main purpose was to push government to start developing rental housing again. And I know that the BC government in the 90s actually pulled in a program called Homes BC that started the process of building here in BC some important subsidized housing. The previous governments hadn't done that, and it is a real challenge that now the province has dropped that fund, or at least the current fund, at a time when we need it more than we've ever needed it. So we're doing our best. All of that was by way of explanation of some of the acronyms we've heard. There is some incredible work. This is, to consider the amount of work that they have to go through to make this into only a 10-page report is astounding. And I applaud them. I think this program is as good as we could hope for under the constraints that we're under, and certainly the time pressure. I thank them for putting in the overtime and getting this before council today, and look forward to. Oh, Councilor Downer.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart.
I was only talking until you pushed your button, and I thought, well, now, good.
I pushed it a while ago, you just noticed it. I echo the concerns and the sentiments that were already expressed by my colleagues here. And I apologize if this was already touched on, but my one question is, if we go down, this has to be done by June 30th, I understand that, we have to change the bylaw. If we get down the road a period of time and we realize the tools, the incentives aren't working for us, we're not getting the units or the affordable housing that we need, is there any provisions in it or opportunities to revise our approach? Do we have that opportunity down the road?
Through the chair to the councillor. Yes, we can revise it down the road. We just have to stay within the legislation. So as you know, we can look at reworking the system, we can see what's working, where we want to make adjustments, and the just requirement is that we are in alignment with the legislation.
It is not carved in stone for X number. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. I'm afraid I did go into the rabbit hole of some history. Thank you very much. I will now, seeing no other comments, staff recommendations before us. Moved by Councilor Mandel and seconded by Councilor Hodge. All in favor? All opposed? Carries unanimously. With our deep thanks.
Mayor Stewart, the next item on the agenda is a report of the General Manager, Planning and Development regarding the 2027 to 28 eligible school sites proposal, School District number 43. The recommendation is that Council accept the 2027 to 28 eligible school sites proposal submitted by School District number 43 and direct staff to continue to work with ST 43 to continue to explore opportunities for new school sites, funding seismic upgrades and additions, and locating childcare on school grounds.
Recommendation moved by Councilor Martin, second by Councilor Towner. Councilor Martin.
Sure. Again, I want to thank staff for working so well with our school district. I know not all municipalities do this, and obviously we're approving projects right up to here. But what about the schools? What about the hospitals? This is our part of the schools. This is what we do. We say yes, set the land aside, and then we support them in terms of what they need based on the development plans of in the city. So thank you, staff. Again, I know relationships with school districts and municipalities are not always great. But we've worked very hard to build a solid one, and staff are a large part of that. So thanks for the collaboration.
Thank you, Councilor Towner.
Thank you. I echo Councilor Marsden's remarks. But I also was really pleased to, I don't think I've seen before on this report that we get every year, the paragraph on childcare on school grounds. And I think saying, staff will continue to work with the school district to explore getting more before and after school care, more childcare on the school grounds. And I just think that's fabulous. I was a working mom, I worked part-time. My children's before and after school care was on the school grounds, and it was amazing. It was convenient with one child still in school and one was in preschool, or they're both after school. Anyways, I just think that our city needs more of this type of childcare, and the fact that we've got it in writing in a report that we're working together with the school district to explore these opportunities, to me is very important. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mandel.
Thank you. I echo the sentiments that we are unique in the sense that if you talk to other local governments across the province and you tell them that we actually go into minister meetings with the school district, they're shocked. Because most don't even do that. They work very independently. But in Coquitlam, we realized that in order to build complete communities, we do need to put in together and we need to advocate together. With that, I just couldn't go without mentioning something that absolutely bugs me, which is the fact that the school taxes, we passed the tax bill earlier, but all the school taxes that are paid go into the general fund of the province. And they also have an additional school tax for loans that are $3 million and over. That also goes into the general fund. And then the school districts now have to wait for the grant to be given so that we can have the schools that we have identified here. So I think we all know we are always, scrounging to say we need to have the school, and there isn't budget for it. So hopefully, just like we are working together with the school district, maybe the province can come on board and realize that we need to put complete communities by them allocating budgets that are sufficient for us to have the schools with the expansions. Yes, I am right here. So,
Thank you. And to have the funding approved on time. It's a pet peeve of this council, and I share it certainly, that the provincial government tends to approve funding for schools about 10 years too late, 10 years before the students are there, or rather the school that gets opened about a decade after the students arrive, and we had a report that was on neighboring school sites, and we had the architecture start and the school site has been located and all of those things, the trees cut down, the hole dug, and all of the processes associated with construction of schools, such that some of the people who moved, the young families that moved nearer to where the designated school was, don't get their children in the school because it's not built yet until the children are in high school or in university. Councillor Hodge. So I want the province, we've spoken to the province, of course, about speeding up that process to make sure that the schools are available at the appropriate moment, and so that we can be more intentional. It's one of the only amenities in new developments that comes after the people move in. Almost all of the other amenities, pipes, the roads, the intersections, traffic lights, parks, are all put in place as development takes place. But schools and transit are the two that tend to lag by about a decade or more. The question is the eligible school sites proposal. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Ms. Deputy Corporate Officer.
Mayor Stewart, the next item on the agenda is a report of the General Manager, Parks and Capital Projects regarding final draft urban forest management strategy with a presentation by the Director of Parks. The recommendation is on screen for you.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Reinhammer, Director of Parks, here to present the final draft urban forest management strategy for your consideration. As you know, the vision is described as Coquitlam urban forest is a living network of trees, parks, and forests that make our city greener, cooler, and healthier. And together we'll grow, protect, and care for the urban forest so it continues to support nature and the community for generations to come. The strategy has 4 theme areas: forests, urban trees, community involvement, and urban forest management. You would have seen before, and just a quick recap of how we got where we are, which is building on the successes of the last 20-so years in doing an extraordinary job creating neighborhood plans, great outcomes related to tree cover, established and well reviewed tree planting best practices, really incredible and very significant forest park preservations in Mundy Park and River and others, And then a very robust community involvement set of programs from Trees Creek to Guide Seed, which is the invasive plant removal program, by the way, and Adopt a Trail, all of which involve hundreds of community members every year already. The implementation plan has 47 action items. Some of the highlights here include change the zoning bylaw to embed targeted tree planting requirements in all development, and then the creation of an implementation plan, so the TIP, the Tree Initiatives Program, that will allow funding when the targets can't be met on a particular site. Funding will be captured and made available for all of the initiatives, but specifically for planting trees within that neighborhood, ideally. The Forest Management Plan framework is a really big deal. That'll go a long way to helping us make sure that we're doing the right things in the forest land that makes up over 80% of our park land. And then working with partners, of course, that's always a feature in this community. And School District 43, again, it comes up here, as well as businesses and a broad range of community organizations. With the goal of a whole long list of community-driven projects and initiatives that actually get people in connection with the urban forest personally, and that can really give them a sense of both connection and pride in their community. And then, of course, centralized and enhanced web-based information hub. But again, that's just a summary of a few of the highlights. This plan came to you last on March 30th and went out to the community for feedback. In that time, I need to correct the number here. We've received, I think as of this afternoon, 58 responses. It's a new metric. One came in today, so that goes up a bit. All of those have been collated and are part of the public record. They went directly to council and then had staff evaluate and consider them. And they focused on, in general, 3 items: the lack of a canopy cover target in the draft, weak tree protection measures, and a perceived lack of integration with land use planning. Following council feedback on the 30th, you'll notice that we've added the F category of the canopy cover target of 50% citywide was in response to both council questions as well as community feedback. I just want to say it's both very ambitious and we expect it to go, the actual measure to go down for some years, but as an ambitious and aspirational target, it's worth stating how massive that is. At 50% of Coquitlam being covered with trees, that means that we're going to have trees covering more than the total land mass of Port Coquitlam, Port Moody, and New West within our city boundaries. So that addition came after and is part of the 6 indicator areas that we expect to report to council on every year, including a very ambitious tree planting target, but also focusing on making sure that the trees we plant thrive, that we achieve the species diversity that's the goal, that we have a pretty ambitious both forest and natural areas management metric, as well as, of course, ever-increasing number of volunteer hours contributed to this program over that time. Just a recap of where we've been, starting in the late 2023, with a bit of a pause in the middle, through both development, community engagement, all of the background research and consultation, and then landing us today on the final draft strategy to council. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Grandheimer. Yeah, I'm going to ask for a prior motion to that. Could we move receipt of the supplementary information? So moved. Moved by Councillor Rasmussen and seconded by Councillor Johnlick. All in favor of receipt? Opposed? That carries unanimously. Councillor Rasmussen. Just moving the staff recommendations on the screen. Councillor Rasmussen moves it. Councillor Martin seconds it. on the floor. Councillor Jones.
Just a question, and been a lot of conversation around, and appreciate the conversation from a lot of the residents who come forward, a lot of passion for environment, the trees. I think there's been some feedback that has made it back now into the strategy, which I'm really glad to see. There's some parts where, look, it's not a direction that we're going in terms of taking a much more strict enforcement around when residents can or feel the need to have to cut down some of their trees. I know in a lot of cases, there's a lot of valid reasons where trees might have to come down. For the most part, my engagement with residents has always been that when they're cutting down a tree, it's been foundation, it's been dead trees, it's just not an appropriate species. It was creating challenges. But we do hear stories sometimes about someone who might be concerned about wind, something perhaps unfounded, and I don't want to take a strict enforcement around penalizing people to have to remove a tree, because we want to make sure that they're planting. We want to make sure that they feel that they can comfortably plant a tree, and if it doesn't work out, they can take it out. But I'm wondering if there's an area for us still to do some more education for those owners who maybe their fears around a specific tree could be unfounded, or maybe we can still do some education in the community to prevent that small group of areas that are cutting down trees on private property that perhaps weren't for a reason everyone here would agree with. So is there space for us to do some education around that? How can we incorporate that?
The chair, absolutely. In the implementation plan, you'll find a couple of points that reference that whole intent. One of which actually came up, was first brought forward by our community working group. And it's the idea of a tree ambassador program that would be modeled after what's been in place for a long time as the Master Gardener program. It's a program that allows that you deliver training, you have kind of testings, you have a common understanding, and then those volunteers actually are available to consult with homeowners when they have questions about the tree in their yard or the right tree to plant or any of those questions. And then the second one, that's 3.1F in the implementation strategy. And on the next page on 3.2B, there's an item for exploring opportunities for providing professional consultations for property owners. And this is a way of deferring the cost but getting professional arborists or consultants to work individually with a homeowner who has exactly those concerns. So while that's not fully fleshed out, that certainly was highlighted as one of the areas of concern that tries to fill the gap between workshops and tree tours and all of the other things that are currently happening that deliver something more tailored to specific property owners and allay their fears.
Thanks for that. The second question is just around some design impacts. So where we do see tree loss has generally been around its development. Now some of this development is going to allow for a lot more trees. I can think we just had a project that was old strip mall and was basically just one paved parking lot for the most part in its landmass. It's going to bring in a lot more trees, lawn space, park space. So these larger development projects actually bring in some trees and green space into the community. It's more the townhouse mid-rise where we've heard perhaps there could be some challenges, but in Burke Mountain, we've had a tree planting rule, replacement rule. We're extending that now to the city, which is great. So can you talk a little bit about how the design impact around some of those townhouses has unfolded? Because we're going up to Burke Mountain, some of the canopy is still new, it's growing, but when that grows out, we're gonna have a really high canopy coverage on Burke Mountain. So just any comment you can give around some of the design impacts that we could be seeing now that there is an actual requirement to be planting trees that are lost?
I'll defer to Mr. Merrill, but I do want to say that one of the big advantages of having those clear metrics in place in advance of a developer coming with a plan is that they will already have integrated that into their core plan. So there won't be any surprises from the developer side.
Mr. Merrill.
Yes, thank you, the Chair to Councillor Tronick. No, fantastic question, and your example of the recently Coquitlam Plaza project, a site that today has no trees on it. When it's redeveloped through their landscaping plans, we'll have hundreds of new trees and landscaped areas and other green components. And we see that pretty universally across a number of sites. And it's really context specific depending on where that growth is occurring. You know, we've got a number of areas in the core of city center that today are parking lots and in the future will be redeveloped and will have new trees planted. There's other areas of the city where, yes, there are some on-site trees that do come down to fit in new building footprints, but then offset with those new landscaping requirements and tree planting requirements. The other thing I wanted to touch on, I think, and this was in an earlier slide, was that importance of the new street trees. And you saw that with that example street on Berg Mountain, with the evolution over the past 20 years of that growing tree canopy. Other than a couple of the major streets in Westwood Plateau, Berg Mountain was the first neighborhood where the city required city-owned street trees on every single street in every block. And we're now replicating that in our redeveloping areas near SkyTrain. So, historically, very few areas of the city had planted street trees, or those that were there just happened to be there or were planted by residents. Now we're actually requiring both the on-site planting of those privately owned trees by the developer, as well as the planting of future city-owned street trees, both of which are contributing to an increase in the future tree canopy cover in those urbanizing areas.
Great. Appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
And thank you, Mayor Stewart. Thank you, Ms. Rockmeier. I think you and your team on this one deserve a lot of credit. This was a challenging one. There's a lot of passion in our community for this topic. There's a lot of passion around this table for this topic, and those passions are good. They don't always see eye to eye on every topic, and navigating that as a staff member and coming up with a strategy that can as best accommodate different perspectives while still trying to achieve overall goals is very challenging. And I think you deserve a lot of credit, your team deserves a lot of credit to getting us to this point. So I want to make sure that I mention you specifically because I think you deserve it. There's a lot to talk about on this one. In fairness to my colleagues, I will be as brief as possible and I'll leave a lot not said because I know my colleagues would like to say some things themselves. Let's start with the positives here. I'm really happy to see that staff heard the feedback from council about a month ago, listened to the feedback from residents, and added a canopy target. I think that goes a long way to having a metric that we can at least gauge whether or not we are succeeding or we're falling behind. I know there would be different discussions about what that canopy target would be. Would it be more specific to general areas or the overall city canopy target? Those are discussions that are certainly valid and we can continue to have them. But I think as a starting point, have an overall city canopy target is a good start. And it is a significant target. 50% of Coquitlam, if my math is correct, is 76 square kilometers. 76 square kilometers is larger than the entire city of Port Moody, Port Coquitlam, New Westminster combined. So if we can reach that target, 50% of our city with a canopy, we have more tree canopies than 3 cities combined. And I'm not just talking about their tree canopy for those cities, I'm talking about their entire area. That is significant. And I think it's a win if we can get there. There will be challenges in the short term given the amount of development that is happening, but I think in the medium to long term, I think it's a significant target and worth praising and looking to achieve. The second thing I would want to say is the long-term solution to this, the long-term solution to tree canopy is education. The more the public learns to value their tree canopy in their environment, the more they are going to protect it themselves. And I'll just give a couple quick examples here. If we look, from when I was a kid to where I am now, approaching my 40s, the instances of drunk driving, the instances of cigarette use, the instances of alcohol use are declining. And it's not because we put really punitive measures, society's put really punitive measures on those, it's because the education in those aspects has gotten through that these are the negatives and that here is better behavior that will benefit you. And I think in the long run, the same thing will be said about our environment, medium to long run, our environment, and a part of that being the tree canopy. So I'm really happy to see that this strategy focuses on education, because that is going to be the medium to long-term solution, I feel. Tree diversity. This is going to protect us from when we have issues with, if there's a pest or a bug that comes in from out of overseas that affects certain species. Large, significant droughts. The more diversity we have, the better protected we're going to be. So I'm really happy to see, again, staff has incorporated that into the strategy. I support it. Planting 5,000 to 7,000 trees per year, give or take, is also significant. I know some years that is going to be a very challenging target to hit, especially as if we're successful early, we're going to run out of space, which isn't a bad thing. So, I'm going to encourage staff to find the metrics and find the implementation strategy that can get us to achieve it. Whether that is required through private properties planting, but more so in public properties. So partnerships with our school district, with the province. There's plenty of area around our highways and freeways in our city that are screaming, not screaming, but are obvious, hey, this is an opportunity. And I know other members of council have mentioned that. So, partnerships with other levels of government and on public property, I think can get us to where we need to go. And my hope is that we get there. And then the last positive here is the cash in lieu. It's not a cash in lieu, as in you don't need to plant the trees and pay us. That's not it. It's you must plant. If you can't hit the target, then you pay the cash and the city will plant. And I think this will be unanimous around our council, but my hope to my direction to staff, or my encouragement to staff, would be if we see a development in the Coquitlam area or the Austin Heights area, wherever it may be, and trees come down there and the redevelopment can't hit the target to replant, we don't take the money from that and replant on Burke Mountain. Right? We first look into the neighborhood where it happened and we focus the resources there. If it's not possible, because we've already replanted it, then we can go outwards from there. But targeting it back into the neighborhood where the trees came down, I think is the appropriate approach. So that would be my ask with respect to that. And then the last thing I'll just talk about is the critique. And the big critique we're hearing from the public that this strategy does not incorporate a bylaw change when it comes to restrictions on tree cutting. My thoughts of that, and I think the public deserves to hear my thoughts on that, and they can agree or not agree, given how I'm going to vote. I understand both sides of this argument. I understand that making it more punitive will provide a disincentive for those to want to cut the tree down, or make it more challenging. At the same time, I also understand the side of the argument that says, we want you as a private landowner to feel free to plant as many trees on your property as you want, whenever you want. And if it doesn't work, you don't feel like now you've lost the opportunity to change without incurring significant costs. Both arguments make sense to me. I'm leaning more towards the side of the latter. I do want us to plant. I do want us in our public to value our trees. As I talked about, our education is going to be the long-term solution here. But at the end of the day, I also don't want people to believe that once they've planted that tree, it's no longer their decision anymore, or that the costs become prohibitive. I want them to still have that freedom. And that's why I'm going to land on that. I'm okay not changing the bylaw at this time. I will ask one more thing. When developers do come forward, it's hard in the high density areas, I understand. Medium density is also challenging. But for townhouses and SMOOs, when we see their pre-applications, staff see their pre-applications, can we look to see if there are clusters of already grown trees? And maybe move it up the priority list saying, if you're a developer, you want to make money, and that's fine, that's okay. If you tweak your project a little bit here, you can keep these, and that's going to increase the value of your project. More people are going to want to bid on wanting to live there. There's a value there. So my ask would be to staff is that if we can move it up the priority list when we talk to developers, because I think there is a value there. At the same time, though, you know, it is going to be their decision, but we can do what we can. So I've talked a lot there. I apologize to my colleagues. I'm going to support this tonight. I'll see where my colleagues go and listen to their comments as well. Thank you. Councillor Asmus.
Well, Kathleen, Brian Hammerhead, to all the staff involved in this. There's been a lot of staff, a lot of consultation. I do think this is a very well-balanced report. It really takes the interests of all sides and comes to a point, I think, where a lot of people will be willing to work with this and move it forward. I don't think you should have one goes too far one way or the other. I think this meets well in the middle of that. The tree canopy cover, I think that citywide is the best way to go. People were saying for the urban containment boundary, but that's a little bit of a misnomer because the city of Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, New Westminster, I can go on, don't have a urban containment boundary. But at Metro Vancouver, it's easy for them to vote, and they did vote for an urban containment boundary because it didn't affect them, but they carried the vote to make the day. So I really believe in the citywide, and I'm thankful for that being in here, and that goal of over 50%. I will note in the report on page 4 that as of 2022, we are at about 52% tree canopy. And so I think Metro Vancouver talked about almost a 40% target, we've already beat that. And so kudos to us that we've taken this responsibility seriously. I've met people from all over the world who come visit here, people from different parts of our region, about the amount of trees that they see in Coquitlam. So we're blessed. I don't think people realize that part of it. So I'm very glad about that. The tree bylaw has been in for a long time. People on residential properties have not been cutting down trees willy-nilly all over the place. Actually, they've probably been planting more trees so they can have control over the property. The tree loss has happened from development, but that also happens over in phases. When new development comes in, trees come down, tree planting happens. If you look at a lot of people that maybe are new to here, would look at Branch Park, and I've heard people say, well, you know, that's beautifully done, they just selected logging. And no, they didn't. That was cleared. Those trees are over 50 years old. That's the change. Westwood Plateau, you can look at when it was first built. I was here. Didn't look good. You can see the greenery, the growth, and the change in that. Northeast Coquitlam, the development is happening up there. Trees are coming down. But you look in a lot of the areas, I talked to yourself, Mr. Ring, we're over a 20%, 25% canopy cover in the Northeast already. And that's only going to continue to go higher as those trees get bigger and we go along. So those are showing those success of what was piloted basically for a number of years in the Northeast. And we've made some understanding and learnings from them. So I think having that go around the rest of the city will be a good thing for the city, and I think that's going to work well. But we had a report a number of years ago when we take a look at the Coquitlam low heat area, and from high rise to mid rise and town housing, what we saw was a 5 to 6 to 1 replacement of trees on new development of all different types of shades. So there's a lot of greenery that has been coming into those developments. You may not see it as today, but over time, it is going to change and become a lot greener to look in those areas. And we have to be thinking, I think we talked about earlier, on our density bonus and those changes that we've had. We have to make housing for people in this area. We have a housing crisis. We have to balance out those needs and issues between the competing whatever. If we make it impossible to make down any trees and stop development, you're just creating a greater crisis. People that have homes would be thankful. You know, great, I've got my home. But the young people who are kind of frozen out a lot of ways in the housing market today will only get more and more frozen out of the housing market. And that's not what we want. So when I look at that, I think, wow, when we look at a future development, we look at the city center. Now, I won't be here in the future, I'm not going to run the next election. But I will tell you that when I look at the city center, the plans we have for the city center, changing over all those parking lots, large parking lot areas, into development with high-rise and other developments, but there's going to be way more greenery and trees and beautification in that area than there is today. And hopefully I'll see some of that in my lifetime, but you know, that'll take probably the next 30 years to develop out. But those trees, on the street trees, the development trees, the shrub, everything is going to change, I think, to a far greener, more vibrant looking community in that area. So let's look to the future with a positive eye. And I think this plan does that. It takes a balanced approach, moves us in a direction, a positive way. In a lot of areas of the city, you're going to see more trees in these areas than what there before. Some areas, like Burkround, where I live, there's going to be tree loss. But that tree loss will come back over time, just like it did on Ranch Park. And so, and hopefully we can keep that housing going, because as we said earlier, the market's not there. We had a housing crisis that we moved into this market. I'd like to say by the provincial government, then some guy down south, is going to exacerbate that problem. But once again, thank you for all your hard work, your dedication to this Kathleen and staff, all involved. This took all departments to come to this. So kudos to all. Thank you.
Mr. Marsden.
Great, thank you. I'll pick up where Councillor Aston stopped, and that is with thanks. So Kathleen, this took a lot of work, a lot of leadership. I know that on page 2 of the report it talks about engaging a consultant in 2023. So bringing in an expert. So recognizing that we've got some great skill within our city staff, and you saw professional support for that as well. So I really appreciate that. I know there's some feedback that we received talking about experts. The part about experts, they don't always agree. They take data and come up with different recommendations at the back end. But I think where you've landed with this is a place with balance. Thanks for incorporating the canopy. One of my comments was, again, the research I did over and above, recognizing what some other cities were doing. I think the approach of a citywide makes sense. And I smiled and made comment to Councillor Johnwich as Councillor Mazzarella was talking about the size of our canopy. It's like he was reading my notes. I know I made a comment about it in a committee meeting, but we have, the map on this, 66 square kilometers. 66 square kilometers of tree canopy coverage in our city. That's not insignificant. And I know in my area, ravines on both sides of the street, significant tree canopy, significant coverage, significant scares of heavy winds. But again, I don't think anybody isn't happy about seeing the trees around them. So I think it is appropriate that we look at the entire city, not just pieces of it, and say, well, gee, this is what the number is. So thank you for that. A couple of other comments that were made were about metrics and try to intertwine this work into all the other various plans. Are you comfortable that the 6 metrics that you come up with do ensure that the strategy incorporates into planning and development and the other pieces? Are we comfortable there that the tree planting and placement, the urban tree health, the diversity, the forest natural management, community involvement, and canopy cover target, that can be intertwined into everything else that we're doing in the various departments?
Chair, Councilor Marsden, absolutely. I think one of the strengths of this city, and we've mentioned it before, is really deep and wide interdepartmental work. So not only with planning and development, with environmental services, et cetera, right across the organization with tons of support. I just wanted to flag all of the work that came from our corporate communications team as well. The group effort that both this product represents, but also that is a hallmark of how things happen in the city. We makes me very confident that we can work collaboratively together and with other partners externally as well.
Okay. I appreciate that, because reading through this and thinking back to how the work we've done over the past dozen years that I've been at this table, I can see this fit. And I think back just recently on the work that was on Coquitlam, the new buildings there. And I know we heard a lot where there was some scrub came out, some trees came out, but the actual tree planting, the net increase there was significant. Again, brand new building, but an increase in number of healthy planted trees as well that are growing up and helping with canopy in that area. So I think that really works. I'm going to continue a comment I made about these payments in lieu. I made a comment earlier. I'm going to say it here again. I don't want to see a repeat of the child care strategy. Collect the money, yes. I want to see within 12 months of the adoption of this plan, I want to see a report back saying what have we done and how we used it. What have we collected, how we use it. And I think that needs to be a regular occurrence. Every single year, talk about what's been done with that money. Again, it's great to collect it, but it's useless if it just sits there and not utilized. We're trying to achieve something here, so let's make sure we're not just sitting on the cash.
I can reassure you a titch about that is the plan to have a citywide planting plan gives us a real leg up in being able to both prioritize based on current opportunities, but also be able to describe and to seize opportunities when they arise. But that public-facing transparency will make it really clear where that money is going and how we're connecting, as there were early comments about where it comes from. Within that neighborhood, we've already pre-identified opportunities for tree planting within that neighborhood that makes it make sense when there's that loss in the neighborhood.
Okay, great, appreciate that. And I know, again, we've got a lot of correspondence, some consistent messaging. I know it doesn't achieve and tick every box for every single person. But again, I think where this has landed is in the right place. We look for planting, we look for the ability to save where we can. And one of the pieces that's important to me is that we're not infringing on people's personal rights either. We've got the ability to make the decisions on what makes the most sense for what we've got in our yard at our time. I know I've corresponded with a number of the folks that have written in and told the story of my mother, who was concerned about these spindly tall trees and the process she had to go through. But the permit to get them out, she didn't feel safe. It was negatively impacting her mental health. She wanted them gone. And when they're gone, she slept better. So, we went through the process. She removed some trees that weren't that attractive and has planted back the replacements she's required to, but she feels better. And I do not think she is the lone voice in our city that feels that way. People are living on older homes, in established areas, tall trees. As I said, I've got ravines on both sides, and when the wind is blowing, it's a commentary in the neighborhood. What's going to come down? Who's it going to hit? And when it hit one of my friends' houses a couple of years ago, at Christmas time, they had to spend Christmas in their basement because their roof was gone. They wanted to look and say, how do we work that? And so I think if it helps people feel safer in their homes, give them the right and the authority to do it themselves, without putting a burden on staff. On LiDAR, all the pieces we can get them everything needs. Kathleen, again, thank you. Appreciate the leadership on this, the guidance on it, getting that in the right spot.
Councillor Hodge. Yeah, thank you. I'll just start where Councillor Marston left off and thank staff for the work they've done to this. And Kathleen, I know this has been a lot of your time. I also want to thank the citizens and the residents of Coquitlam. This has been 3 years of conversations, and I just want to thank them for their passion, their commitment to the urban forest. As I said, it's been 3 years. The conversation started before that. They're going to continue after tonight. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the meetings that you've invited us to, the meetings you've held in your homes. Invited me to workshops, Zoom calls, the letters and emails that you wrote, many on the weekends. We've got 100 pages of letters that staff put together for us tonight, so we've done that for reference. And again, just for being here tonight to show the importance of the conversation that we're having. And I've learned a lot from the emails and the conversations that we've had. I want different, like everybody, I want more trees, I want bigger trees, I want bigger trees planted. Many people around this table know I've moved 30-foot trees on my own property. I've planted new trees that are bigger than cranes that bring them in, so it can be done. I want more trees that are parks, more on school grounds, and I want more tree diversity. We need these trees. We need them for not just the heat dome, not just for shade in the summer or for nice fall colors, but we need these trees for wildlife. We need them for the biodiversity, and they're important for people's health. And I've seen the studies, I've read the studies about people who live near trees and leave near forests have better mental health, maybe not necessarily on a windy night, but they are an important part of our health. And I'll just note that I read an article tonight that this weekend, 24 locations in BC shattered daily temperature records. So we know that the heat is coming, and we know that the trees are going to play an important part. So I think that's why this strategy is important. And I think this Councillor Mazzarolo mentioned the education piece, and that's where I think we really need to do more on the education. We need people to embrace trees. We want people to have trees, to want to have trees on their property, who want to plant trees on their property. And as I said, not just for the pretty colors or for the summer shade, but they need to know the importance of the trees and to think twice before they cut the tree. And I believe that the education will be important. Councilor Mazzarolo mentioned some of the behavioral changes. I chair several zero waste committees, and I can tell you today we throw out less than we did. We're learning about recycling. We're learning behavioral changes. We're learning the importance of the environment. And I believe through education we will help to save trees. So the people who just think them as a nuisance because they have to rake the leaves or they're blocking a view, those are the trees that we can save and that we do need to save, and I believe we can achieve some of that through education. This plan has 47 action items. There's certainly the one that I am really pleased to see that we've talked about tonight, and just recently added, and part of it because of the discussions that we've had with many of you in the room and the letters that we've come out, and that's about having a canopy, having a tree canopy target. I think that's a big move. It wasn't there in the earlier parts of the draft. And the target, I think it's ambitious, but I think it's achievable. And when I hear figures like, if we hit that 50%, we'll have a tree canopy the size of our 3 neighboring cities. And that's not just their tree canopy, that's as if those lands were just forest. So that, I think, is a great goal. I think that together we can achieve that. Again, I think it's important that we plant the right trees. I really on the plan it says we don't want any more than 5% of one species. As mentioned earlier, that's going to be really important as we face some of the climate changes and some of the pest infestations. But we also have to try to mimic what was here before. I mean, it's nice to have some trees with beautiful fall colors, but we need those trees that are actually representative of the native trees that were on these 3 mountains that we call Coquitlam. So I think that's one of the things that we need to work towards. The cash in lieu, I think is a good benefit, but it's not the one that I want to rely on, because as Councillor Marsden said, we got to spend the money, we got to plant the trees, and we got to put the trees in the neighborhoods where they came out of. So that, to me, is one of the things that we can do. If you don't have room to put a tree on your property and you took down a tree, you can pay to help somebody else put a tree somewhere else, because I think that's one of the ways we're going to achieve the tree canopy target that we're really working towards. So I want to thank staff for their work. I'm going to be supporting the plan as it is, and I want to thank everybody who's written, all of us who came up tonight, and together I think we're going to try to move forward and try to achieve an urban tree canopy cover that we can work this out. Thank you.
Councillor Kim.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stewart. I too want to thank everyone in the community for the engagement, for the feedback, and for their passion. Certainly, when you think about the fact that we hit, stage 2 water requirements on the 1st, you look at hitting 28, 29 degrees this early in spring, we know things are changing, the climate. And so it really impacted me in working through this and to see what we are doing as a city, as a council, as staff. But with that being said, I do believe the work that you've put in, Ms. Reiheimer, is a very difficult, far-reaching type of strategy and plan, is very comprehensive as well. So I do appreciate all the work. I also appreciate some of the points in it, like the cash in lieu. Let's face it, we would want more trees, and the fact that we, especially in there are areas that we can manage more effectively, like with public land, or trying to get more trees into SD43. At the end of the day, there's a good large proportion of properties that are private and are changing hands, so we can put the cash in lieu. At this point in time, I'm very open to see where that can take us with the right rail guards on where that money goes and how it's spent. I certainly would like to focus on the native trees that we could have, and to see where we go with that, especially with the continual annual reporting. I think about the canopy. I know at that point in time I was chairing the council and committee, and a lot of it was to continue to solicit or facilitate to get some feedback. There was discussion around the council table or committee table at that point in time with the canopy, so I appreciate the 50% aspirational target here. I appreciate all the metrics that have also been stated. And with that, I will go on to the bylaws as well. This one was challenging. I think about, if there's, is this the time for us to make some changes on this? I think back to when my parents got their home in the 80s, 1981, and some of the areas in Southwest Coquitlam, just because those trees were taken down to build those homes, doesn't mean, is it time? Just because that happened in the past doesn't mean it has to happen in the future. But, especially when you look at some of those trees that have grown, these mature trees across our city, especially Southwest Coquitlam, they're quite amazing. I recall a resident who took a few of us on a tour in one of the areas around just south of Coquitlam, and some of the trees were just magnificent. But so in trying to see how we wade through that, but ultimately I think about property owners, and at this point in time I'm still leaning more towards the freedom of being able to dictate what they do on their private property. And I don't say that lightly, but at the same time I think it's important. I thought about more restrictions, but I think putting more restrictive bylaw on at this point in time, especially with some of the unintended consequences that could happen later on. I know some examples have been provided by our mayor in the past within other jurisdictions, other cities, I should say, where it actually serves to decrease trees. So that aside, just placing the need for property owners to have the right to So with that being said, I know not everything is perfect. I'd love to say that this plan and strategy is going to get the thumbs up from everyone, especially when points and the space of trees cause a lot of emotion, and just because we know the benefit they provide. But with that being said, I think it is balanced. It is a huge step forward, and so I will be supporting this at this point in time. And I appreciate all the work.
Councillor Towner.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. Before I begin, I just want to say I try not to repeat things that have already been said, but I made notes about what I'm going to say, and a little bit of what I'm going to say has already been said. But I'm very tired today, and I will share a tree observation that I made yesterday. I ran in the BMO Vancouver Marathon. It was very hot. It was actually too hot. There was people collapsed on the side of the road. And I will share with you that every time we hit a street covered in trees, or we got to Stanley Park and there was a tree canopy, I could feel the temperature drop. I mean, I kind of wanted to just run back and forth under the trees for a bit. That's how hot it was yesterday. Early May. It's kind of scary. It really emphasized to me that climate change is definitely changing our weather patterns. Anyways, I love trees. I value trees. I want to start off by thanking you and the staff for all your work on this. I think I've read the whole strategy a couple times now, and every time I read it, I see something else that I get excited about. It's very comprehensive. And I really value and appreciate everybody who reached out to me and talked to me and shared your input. I heard a wide variety of perspectives on this whole strategy. When I read it and when I see it, I do see a very well thought out, comprehensive strategy that's in line with Coquitlam's current. It's a plan for the future, but it's in line with our current reality. Provincial legislation, climate change, urban containment boundary, and our engaged stewardship community groups. And so rather than comment on all the goals in here and the 47 actions, I'm just going to comment on 2. One of the goals, and although I support all 4, one of them is to promote community connection and public education. And I just want to say that our city is truly blessed to have the stewardship groups in our city that we do have. The tree tours on I always get that wrong, Samaquiquala, the former Riverview site. The invasive plant pulling, the tree planting. There's been numerous groups over the years. I've been involved with many of these groups well before I became elected. And the education and the engagement and the just increasing awareness and pride in our green space and our environment the amount of work that is done by these people is commendable and very robust. And I'm happy to see it into our strategy that we're going to harness this. I think that's very important. And as was already stated, that education of our residents is key to the success of preserving and caring for and expanding our urban tree canopy. I also just wanted to touch on that we are more educated now with respect to climate change and mix of species and planting trees that will survive the hotter, longer summers and the less rain and all that. And the whole concept in here about the right tree in the right place really stands out to me. I had questions about a tree on my own property, called an arborist, and he came and he said that there should not even have been, that tree should not have been planted there. Now it's destroying my carport, my driveway, and even the foundation of my house, but I don't want to cut it down, but it shouldn't have been planted there. So I like the fact that we are more educated now, and the future trees going in will hopefully be planted in the right spot. And we truly do need to take into account that not all trees are the right trees for that area. So what I'm going to share now is the reason why I'm fine and why I'm actually fully in support of leaving our tree cutting bylaw where it is, because it actually causes me to shudder to share with you that I could be a grieving mom and a devastated grandma right now, because just a few short months ago, late at night, when my daughter and my grandbaby were sound asleep in bed, they got woken up to a horrific sound and drywall and branches coming down on them in their bed. And it's because a very, very large mature hemlock, wrong tree, wrong place, fell on their rancher-style rental home that the landlord knew looked iffy on the outside. And so, they were told that the only reason they're alive today is because they had a big beam going through their living room, and that's what stopped the tree. So I'm only sharing this because it really makes me realize that as an elected official, it's my responsibility to have input into public policy decisions that don't inadvertently have unintended consequences. Or for landlords or property owners to hesitate taking action on something because they perceive it to be bureaucratic or expensive or something like that. So as was previously stated, if a resident on their own private property is uncomfortable with the tree, education is important. They can't sleep at night, the wind, the rain. I do feel that we gain more by having people plant trees, realizing they can change their mind later than if we have a really punitive, expensive, cumbersome tree bylaw. And I've heard that a neighboring municipality that does have a more restrictive tree cutting bylaw, the same number of trees are still going to come down. It will just cost the resident or the property owner more and the city more to administer it. So it ends up the same number of trees come down because we can't stop trees when it comes to development. Anyways, so that's a very personal reason for me to always be aware of unintended consequences. Things can happen. So I do think that this strategy is very well balanced, very well thought out, has a lot of good stuff in here. And it also says in the report that we can change it. We can tweak it as we go. If adapt over time as conditions, data, and community needs evolve. I spoke about that on a previous report today. We're going to be aware of anything that we need to change and evolve, and I believe that we will be responsive. So for now, this is a great body of work, and I support it as is. And I want to thank everybody who participated in the engagement process.
Thank you. Councilor Mandel.
Thank you. So I want to start by sharing one little grievance, I guess, to people that are so passionate, not only about this topic, but so many topics. We received a lot of emails. I'm talking a lot of emails. A lot of them copied and pasted them, right? And then people send. Just to let you know, from a governance perspective, it's actually disruptive. It doesn't help. What I want to appreciate are the people that reached out and had conversations or invited for meaningful conversations. We get more done that way than inundating us with thousands of emails, which really bog down and takes us away from actually doing the work that you want us to do. So I want to take an approach from a governance perspective, because I think it has been mentioned already that none of us here are specialists when it comes to this topic. We have hired staff and we brought in consultants that are specialists in this space, and our job is to then receive that information and make a governance decision. So let's talk a little bit about the governance piece. There are different governance approaches when it comes to this work. You will see that other communities take a highly regulatory approach to government. And our approach in Coquitlam, and thanks to staff for bringing this approach to us, is a more balanced and integrated approach. Neither one is wrong. It's just a different way of getting to the same result. So I thank staff for being so patient with council, because of the passion that's also here, we asked a lot of questions. And we sent you back and we asked more questions and more questions because we wanted to make an informed decision. So thank you for that. So also talk about the communities that have taken that highly regulatory approach. They have more strict controls, they've got permits, requirements, and they've got limitations on removal. And I think my colleagues have already talked about how we are not doing that. are we getting the same results? The other thing to think about is we do have growth pressures. We talked about a report earlier about the regulations and legislation that the province have put on us. In Coquitlam, we are a growth city, a high growth city. And our targets are higher than Port Moody and Port Coquitlam and all the other ones around us. We have more growth expectations. We also have the transit-oriented development. So guess what? We have more high-rises in other communities. We, again, going back to the housing deliverables that were given to us. And we can't go to the province and say, oh, sorry, no, we're not going to do that, right? We have to, fulfill those as well. Not to mention that we have the urban containment boundary, as my colleagues have already mentioned. So if we adopt a highly restrictive byway in Coquitlam, we actually will be countering the other work that we need to do. So I hope that the community realizes that we listened to a lot of the things that you're saying, and we even made some changes, for example, to the canopy targets that we now have, because we listened. But for some things, from a governance perspective, knowing who we are and knowing what we have to do as a governing body, there are some things that we have to say on this approach is bad. So, I think we have taken that flexibility approach and a pragmatic approach to implementation, but it will reach us, it will help us reach that capacity that we all have been talking about. So ultimately, this is about policy trade-offs, right? We will get there, but we're just taking a different route to get into the result. So I hope people see that, and I hope people see that there isn't one way to getting there, right? I already talked about the duality of that policy decision. So I'll end by saying that, we in Coquitlam are taking the approach to balancing environmental stewardship with growth, and we are also looking at the long term and the urban resilience that we need as the regional leader in this area. There's just some things that we have to do different. So when next time you try to compare, you can't compare community to community because it's not a one size fits all. We all have different challenges, we all have different targets. So, but thank you all so much for your passion for this, and thank you staff for your patience, because you kept going back and giving us more data so that we can get to where we are now, so we can make this a very, very informed and different approach. There was no question. I just had to talk about my journey to getting here, and I think it's true to a lot of us here. Because we did, I know I was going and researching what New Zealand does and what the communities do, because I just wanted us to get to a good place. And I know they're getting there, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Azarello, you have clarification?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stewart. I made a statement earlier this evening with respect to if you added up all of the three cities around us combined, that we would have a higher target. I mistakenly included the water component of Coquitlam in our land area. So I made a statement of fact that's not correct. If you made a statement of fact, you need it to be correct. And if you make a mistake, you need to correct the record. If we hit our 50% target, it'll be 61 square kilometers, which means we will hit 86% of the total area of those three municipalities around us. We would not have one. So I just wanted to make sure that the public knew that I did a math error, and I needed to correct it, or I wouldn't sleep tonight. That's the lawyer in me. Yes, thank you.
Councilor Mazzarola is an excellent counselor, but
not a good mathematician.
Okay, Councilor Towner.
Thank you. So I told you I'm tired. I also forgot to mention that my daughter doesn't live in Coquitlam. She lives in a different municipality. I do have a question. So whenever I go to conferences, I always attend the tours and the sessions on urban tree canopy. And I've read and I've heard that a lot of states, provinces, countries have done away with a tree canopy target because different cities are in different stages of growth. Like some are already built out and some still have greenfield, and it's like comparing two humans at different stages of life. One's going to have more muscle than the other, but they're both humans. They're at different stages of growth, right? So I'm just curious, I'm fine with having the target because it was wanted. And if staff feels it makes sense, and we're already exceeding it, we're at 52%. But what are I'm curious on your thoughts, because a lot of the experts out there have done away with the canopy target because different cities are in different stages of growth. And if we go down, it may look bad, but it's because we're building housing. So how do we, just would like your thoughts on that.
Disagree. Thank you, through the chair to Councillor Towner. So I think you're probably speaking to the fact that there used to be more of a one-size-fit-all approach that was kind of applied or promoted for urban forest canopy cover. And I think what's changed is that there aren't national organizations or nonprofit groups that are advocating for that kind of, for this whole region of North America, you should have this canopy cover target. It's more about recognizing where the communities are at in their stage of development, what type of ecosystems are in that community, and then coming up with something that's custom and fits for that community, which is what we've done in this case.
Okay, well, I spoke earlier on custom and fit for where Coquitlam as is now and in the future, so thank you. I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. All my colleagues have weighed in. I weigh in a bit myself. And I've seen some comment that allowing people to control 1 or 2 trees a year on their own property is bad. Please blame me. I was one of the voices around council in 2006, I believe it was, who spoke to my experience. I used to sit on a number of committees around the province, and one of them was the City of Vancouver's RS1, RS1S Advisory Committee. There's a name. It dealt with primarily the single-family neighborhoods, but RS1S was a special zone of single-family. In any case, in that context, I got to see a whole bunch of what worked. And what wasn't working in Vancouver was nobody was planting trees on private property because, and they were asked, and the typical resident would say, well, once you plant a tree, you don't own that anymore. The city now says that you're fettered in your ability to, say, add a bedroom or put up a patio or a playground for the kids or whatever. And we saw that in Vancouver and in other communities where overly restrictive or restrictive tree bylaws made it so that people were reluctant to plant trees on private property. And you can go to areas of East Van, for example, where a whole row of an intact row of 1955 era bungalows, the kind of house I grew up in, Coquitlam, a whole row of them, say 10 houses, and on private property, not a single tree, front yard or backyard. And they've had 75 years to plant a tree if they wanted one, but nobody was planting trees on private property, and the answers they got back from surveys was because of the restrictions of the tree bylaw. And so there were a number of members of council, we all pretty much thought the same, and that's how the laxity, if you want to call it, of the tree bylaw, tree protection bylaw. We wanted to encourage the planting of trees on private property. We knew that we couldn't prevent the removal of a tree if development was the goal, and that's in law. It also is almost impossible to save a tree with the province's new housing choice, new SHMU, the small scale multi-unit residential. We use these acronyms so everyone understands what they mean, but the province imposed this. Every lot can have 4 houses kind of thing. And that means that with all the underground pipes and underground wiring and everything that goes into a house, there's no way you can protect the root zone of a tree on those properties. So we ended up with a reality that with redevelopment, we can't prevent the removal of a tree. We can sometimes move, as Councillor Mazzarolo said, move the setbacks and try to figure things out in order to encourage the protection of trees on private property and put a real effort into planting trees. And there was a number of years where we were giving trees with advice so that they were planted right with species in right place to residents to plant trees on their own property. And I know thousands of residents took those trees and took them home and planted them and now have a 10-year-old or tree on their property that's going to one day be that increase in our urban canopy. As for the urban containment boundary, that's another element. We put that in as in our urban regional context statement in the regional growth strategy back 15 years ago. We identified the urban containment boundary because we wanted to contain growth to certain portions of Coquitlam and protect the forests beyond that. It actually got expanded a little bit when the province sold some developable land. And it was forest. The province sold it to a developer, and as a result, we're required, I'm sure the province would have something to say if we decided to declare it a park or something like that. So we are required to allow development to take place in those forested areas that the province sold for development. And that's the challenge with the communities that have a bit of greenfield. We're the last ones on this side of the river, this side of Coquitlam, that have greenfield development, which means that we're necessarily going to reduce, we're going to have to remove trees in those forested areas in order to accommodate the development, some of which was designated 150 years ago for residential development. That's Burke Mountain. And a whole bunch of those neighborhoods were mapped out as lots in the streets and sold abroad for redevelopment 150 years ago. Craig, you remember that? So he took pictures of it for the newspaper, yes. So it is a challenge. We try to balance these things. Everyone on council, all my council colleagues, value the urban forest, value the canopy, know the impact of canopy reductions, and know the impact of what we can do to increase canopy. Increasing canopy is necessary, and that requires us to plant trees because there aren't enough. And I'm most appreciative in Malarco, for example, that I kind of grew up in. A lot of the avenues are now being converted to, they're going to have curved green space, sidewalk, and there's going to be street trees planted on all those corridors, just like we see in Vancouver now, those beautiful spring displays of pink blossoms. We will end up with some of the same things on a lot of our urban streets, where we can. The city can obviously plant street trees, but we also want to encourage these trees on private property. And on my street, there are way more developed by the city 30 years ago, and there's way more trees on private property than there are on those 75-year-old streets in Vancouver that I was describing earlier. So it really is trying to figure out, it would probably be easier to explain if we just prohibited cutting of trees, even if it isn't the right thing to do, because then everyone would kind of think we're doing the right thing. So blame me if you disagree, but I do think that I want you to understand that I'm passionate about trying to get our community cooled to the extent we can because of the impacts of climate change on the next generations. Those of us in the room with gray hair, our generations are actually among those responsible for the climate change that we see today. And I don't want to leave our planet the way it's going in a lot of places. I want our community to be thriving for children and our grandchildren, and Terry's grandchildren. And I think we can do that, but we have to find a balance as well. And the province imposes development targets on us and says everything around a SkyTrain is 5 FSR. We saw that earlier on that other item. Everything around a SkyTrain at 5 FSR means you cannot save a tree. There is no possibility of saving a tree with 5 FSR. And the province has imposed that. So how do we get trees in those dense concrete urban core? That's the challenge, and we can do it with street trees, we can do it with replacement trees planted by the developer at Coquitlam Station, at Coquitlam Central Station, both of which are completely surrounded by parking lots today. In fact, Coquitlam's largest car dealer was across the street from the SkyTrain station at Coquitlam Central, and that blacktop has now been removed. It will be redeveloped. It had no trees. It was a Chrysler dealership. It will have trees. It won't be as treed as you and I might like, but I truly hope that we can plant a lot of green space in those spaces as we see the redevelopment of Coquitlam Plaza, as we see the redevelopment of Coquitlam Center, shopping center, our largest parking lot, as we see the redevelopment of, for that matter, the park and ride at Coquitlam Central, or the Coquitlam Chrysler dealership, or Sunwood Square. All of those places will be redeveloped, and they will have more trees on them by far than they have today. This is a plan, I think, that is workable. I truly appreciate the staff that put it together, that balanced it. Kathleen, I've known you for years. You're so passionate about these things, about the community that we can become. And I thank you very much for what I think is an outstanding policy. I see no other speakers, and so I open the question. Thank you. The final draft of the Urban Forest Management Strategy and the Urban Forest Management Strategy implementation, and direct staff to bring forward all necessary bylaw amendments. All in favor? Opposed? Carries unanimously. And I too thank, as my colleagues have, those that engaged in a dialogue with us, because these are important topics, and I really appreciate your passion. Thank you.